everybody. Today's Tuesday, June 9th, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother, Professor Marandi is here with us. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. It's always a great pleasure being on your show.
I want to start with what has happened between Iran and the Israelis. We had the attacks happening between the two sides. Israeli attack on Dahia, which it was an empty building in Dahia, by the way. No one was killed, considering Hezbollah forces, but ordinary people were killed in that attack. Then Iranian response. I personally didn't believe that Iran would respond the way that Iran responded. I thought that maybe Yemen gonna attack Israel because they didn't kill anybody, and they killed no Hezbollah forces after all. Then we saw Iran attacking Israel, Israel attacking Iran, Iran responding. What has happened yesterday and the day before?
As you know, the people in Gaza and the people in Lebanon have no support from anywhere. In Gaza, we saw and we continue to see genocide taking place. Egypt doesn't do anything. Turkey's government doesn't do anything. The Jordanians don't do anything. These regimes in the Persian Gulf, they don't do anything. And so, and actually what they did was that instead of like Iran supporting the resistance, they went and collaborated with Trump and put a stamp of approval on his ceasefire, which was a fake ceasefire. They went to Egypt and they had a grand ceremony and they celebrated Trump, the leaders from the region. And since then, around 1,000, probably now more than 1,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been slaughtered. Lots of kids in the last few days. A family or two burned alive. One family, I tweeted footage of a family burning in the fires, burning, a person still moving. Catastrophic. You won't see this in the Western media, of course, and Western journalists won't tweet these things because, it's not worthy. It's not newsworthy, I suppose, for them. But so in Lebanon, we now see a repeat of what's going on in Gaza. And the Israelis have openly said that we want to create another Gaza. And of course, the Europeans, they won't sanction them. European parliamentarians won't say anything. Parliamentarians from different countries across Europe or the UK or Australia or New Zealand, no one's going to sanction the Israelis. No one's going to punish them. In fact, during this period, as the genocide in Gaza has been ongoing and as the genocidal attacks in Lebanon have been ongoing, you see Iranians being sanctioned. And but not just by the Americans, but by all of these countries affiliated to the United States. So in Lebanon, again, we saw what they were doing to the people in the south. The Lebanese government, of course, they're collaborators with Americans, the prime minister and the president. They were installed by them. They don't have popular support. The Americans forced these two people into power. And the Western embassies, NGOs, the Lebanese president, the prime minister, they are basically preventing the refugees from the south from moving around in different parts of the country. And the Arab regimes, the Qataris and the Saudis and the Emiratis, they are basically encouraging their takfiri, the ISIS, Al-Qaeda type, the Wahhabi Salafi type, to prevent the refugees from going to their neighborhoods. So you have the supporters of the resistance, which are from all walks of life and from all religions and sects, but of course predominantly Shia. They are trapped. They can't leave, and their cities are being flattened intentionally with Western support. And they're not allowed to receive aid. They're blocking aid from Iran, from Iraq. So the government in Lebanon is trying to humiliate the supporters of the resistance, to break them, to bring them to their knees, to impoverish them. And I mean, it's an utterly evil president, utterly evil prime minister. But and then you have Al Qaeda in Syria blocking routes for Hezbollah to get supplies, and then you have the Israeli regime flattening the country. So the last place where many of the refugees could go was Beirut. And in parts of Beirut, they won't allow them to go. So people, Lebanese citizens, people who've been there for generation after generation, who've been there before Lebanon was created, whose families were there for hundreds, if not thousands of years, they're not allowed to move around in their own country. So this conspiracy between Western embassies and Western NGOs and the Western installed government and Al Qaeda and ISIS and the Zionists to crush the resistance was ongoing. And then the Israelis said, we're going to flatten Beirut. They openly say it, that we're going to flatten it. With in southern Beirut, you have hundreds of thousands of people, mostly supporters of Hezbollah, the resistance, and the supporters of the Palestinians. Because in Lebanon, there is a segment of society that's affiliated to the Lebanese forces that hate the Palestinians. They're allies of the genocidal forces of Zionism. And of course, anyone who's in the Western camp will do what the West wants. So you have these people who stand against the resistance for a host of reasons. So the Israeli regime wanted to flatten that so that the refugees who went to Dahia and to Beirut would have to leave. And also the Israeli regime is warning Christian communities and others that host refugees to force them to leave. So in Tyre, for example, or Sur, they give warnings. So it's sort of like the Nazis searching for Jews. Here, the Zionists are searching for Muslims and warning the Christians not to host them in areas where they do. So, if Beirut, or especially the south of Beirut, is flattened, then you have half of Lebanon as refugees, and then the government won't let tents. Iran send tents or food or anything like that. They want them to go hungry. So Iran knew that this would be a terrible situation, the massacre of people across Beirut, flattening their homes, people on the streets, people who had lives, and their crime was that they supported the Palestinian cause. They tried to draw off the forces of the Israeli regime as they were carrying out genocide. They made sacrifices to help save the Palestinian people. In other words, the supporters of the resistance in Lebanon are the most dignified of people on this planet, the most honorable people of this planet. And those who tried to crush them, of course, the most dishonorable people on this planet, whether Lebanese or Syrian or Zionist. So the Iranians warned the Israeli regime that if you bomb Dahia or Beirut, we'll strike. And for a few days, the Israeli regime backed down. We had that phone conversation between Trump and Netanyahu, where supposedly or allegedly or possibly Trump warned Netanyahu and attacked him and insulted him, which I think was a significant, what Axios, a very dishonest outlet, but by publishing it, I think there was a lot of significance in this, because I think that then, regardless of what Trump's intentions were, I think the powerful people who are supporting Axios, who are the Zionists, I think they probably, though, at least that faction or that part of the Zionists in power in the United States, probably intentionally humiliated Netanyahu. It was not a piece of news that was wanted to show differences. It really, I think, humiliated Netanyahu, and I think there was probably a purpose behind that. But in any case, for a few days, the Israeli regime refrained from slaughtering people in Beirut. They continued to slaughter them across the country, and we'll get to that in a moment. But then they carried out this strike, and I think intentionally they tried to do it in a way so that it wouldn't be too severe. 2 ordinary people died, as you rightly point out. No one from Hezbollah was martyred. The 2 people I assume, on the streets or on some of the floor of the building, they were martyred. But or maybe they were just in their houses, and the Israelis decided to bomb those houses. I think the Israelis didn't carry out a heavy strike because they wanted to make the Iranians prevent the Iranians from striking back. In other words, sort of like some sort of borderline attack, so that Iran wouldn't be provoked enough, and then they would do it again and again, let's say after a few days, and then normalize slaughter in Lebanon. I mean, it's amazing what sort of creatures we're talking about, what sort of monsters we're talking about, their mentality and their supporters in the West and in the region. But the Iranians said no, and they, as we saw, carried out heavy strikes, very effective strikes. And then the Israeli regime struck back, and they again were punished by the Iranians. No major damage was done in Iran, but I think it was, whatever happened, the very fact that Trump was begging to have this come to an end has significance in itself. And the fact that Netanyahu disobeyed Trump, even though publicly he said he is going to stop it and he calls the shots, I think this was a humiliation for Trump, and it shows how ineffective and incapable he is. Just like the previous report that came out humiliated Netanyahu. Here, Trump was humiliated. Of course, Trump brought it upon himself because he said in public that he's the one who calls the shots. So even if it's for show, it's still a humiliation. But because he showed that he's incapable of imposing his will, being the person, the benefactor of the Israeli regime. That's where all the power and money and wealth comes from. So for now, what we see is that the Israelis are they're very much afraid of striking Dahia or Beirut, but now they're hammering other parts of southern Lebanon in rage and anger, and so killing more and more civilians. And they're just bombing homes and apartment blocks and whoever's in them. And of course, Western media is completely indifferent and silent. But I don't think that Iran will even be the Iranian will be willing to accept this for long. And in any case, we're in a stalemate situation. The Israeli regime has obviously been hurt in Lebanon badly. They've been humiliated, and they can't destroy Beirut on the one hand. And on the other hand, the siege in the Persian Gulf that works both ways continues. And so, we have to see how things play out.
But when it seems that the Israelis, as they reported in their media, they didn't think that Iran would respond. But when it comes to the ongoing attacks to the southern part of Lebanon, what would be the reaction from the resistance? I'm talking about Yemen, because yesterday we've seen Yemen sending drones to Israel. And then we had the head of Iranian Council of Experts, Sadiq Larijani. He said that it's not going to be Beirut, it's going to be southern part of Lebanon, it's going to be Gaza, and Iran is doing that. Iran is, with ongoing talks or messages between Iran and the United States, all these cases are considered. We know that, because on the other hand, we had the Hamas forces reporting that Iran informed them that Iran is trying to do its best to bring the case of Gaza into the negotiation, the talks they have with the United States. What do we know about that?
Well, from the very beginning, Gaza was a part of the negotiations. The Iranians said that there must be a ceasefire and an end to the war on all fronts, especially Lebanon. The reason why they said especially Lebanon was because the slaughter carried out in Lebanon was reminiscent of the darkest days in Gaza. Every day, tens of Lebanese civilians were being martyred. And as Western media and Western journalists based in Beirut and in the West were saying that the Israelis are bombing Hezbollah strongholds, we were seeing images from social media of dead children and dead families and people being pulled out from under the rubble in Lebanon, not something that the Western media would tell us. And I think by now everyone should recognize that Western media is just, they shouldn't bother even following them or their journalists, corporate media and regime media. But more recently, the Iranians have been more explicit about naming Gaza. So they named Lebanon because of the sheer amount of slaughter in Lebanon. But in recent weeks, we've seen an increase in the slaughter in Gaza. And every day, multiple people and children are being massacred. And as I said, I posted one, I retweeted a post where with footage showing a family burning alive. And it didn't even register in the West. I mean, these journalists are just so inhumane. They become so, I don't know what's wrong with these people, these politicians and in the West. It's sort of like they're under some sort of spell or it's just amazing. It's beyond my comprehension, their indifference to the people of Gaza and Palestine and Lebanon. And a couple of days ago, they shot a 7-month-old child in the head in the West Bank. And I saw a couple of Western media outlets trying to justify the killing, especially on X, that the part where they sometimes they have news, that's particularly horrible. So because of the increased number of people being slaughtered in Gaza every day, the Iranians have put a greater emphasis on supporting or on bringing an end to the slaughter in Gaza. But the problem in Gaza is a bit different from Lebanon, because Hamas under duress, because all these Arab regimes and Turkey and others, they went to Trump's monkey show, his circus in Egypt, and they put a stamp of approval on that one-sided fake ceasefire. So at the negotiating table, it's very difficult for the Iranians to do all that much for Gaza, because the Americans say we already have a ceasefire, and everyone, Erdogan and Abdullah and Jordan and Sisi and all the regimes in the Persian Gulf, they put theirs, the Pakistani, I think Prime Minister was there, they all put their stamp of approval on this. And so I don't know how far the Iranians can go, but the Iranians have told Hamas that they are insisting on making sure that Gaza is included in this ceasefire.
What is the situation in the Persian Gulf? Donald Trump said the blockade is still in place, and Iran says that the blockade cannot continue. And if the United States is honest in the way that it's behaving, not only the blockade, the case of the frozen Iranian assets. And there we are receiving mixed messages coming out of the region. On one side, Pakistanis are reporting that the situation is good, everything is perfect with the negotiations, everything is getting more positive. On the other hand, we see these sort of confrontations between Iran and the United States, between Iran and Israel. And last night, we've seen the Vice President of the United States talking about maybe based on what he said, that the objectives of the United States are different from what Israel has at this particular moment. So, what is the assessment on the part of Iranians, and how serious is the United States in the ongoing negotiation or talks or messages, whatever it is?
Well, I think it's obvious that someone like the Vice President of the United States would speak this way, and we see more uh, more leaks being more leaks about Trump speak or about Trump and Netanyahu, or where Trump says that if you continue like this, you'll be on your own. Part of this, I think, is we shouldn't take it any seriously. But part of it, even if we consider it to be just show, I think shows that the regime in Washington understands that the American public are not happy, and this is becoming a big issue. And so they have to be seen as having agency, as having their own decision-making process, because people across the world and even in the United States increasingly are coming to the recognition that the Zionists are in charge, that they have the upper hand. We're seeing right now how the Israeli genocidal military is being fused with the American military. We see that as the genocide progresses, the Israeli regime is taking, and the oligarchy, the Zionist oligarchy, are taking all the media in the United States and all the means of control and AI, and so people are seeing them take control, and they see their leaders as agents of Zionism increasingly, and so they have to try to show to the people that no, we are making our own decisions and we're not controlled by them. But I think that ultimately this is not a good sign for the Israeli regime anyway, or Zionists, because the very fact that they do have to make these statements, whether they're just for show or there's any substance behind it, indicates that things are changing in the United States and across the world. So, even if it's for show, it's not a good sign. Just like even if Trump's leaked statements regarding Netanyahu, even if it's for show, it's not a good sign for Netanyahu or his allies of the Israeli regime. For Trump to say that everyone hates Israel or everyone hates Netanyahu, it's not a good sign. Whatever the intention is for doing that. So that's one issue. So it's too early to take any of this seriously. What Vance says or what Trump says. On the battlefield, they're working together. The Israeli regime their jets are being refueled by American jets that are based in these countries in the Persian Gulf. Of their radar installations in Turkey and AWACS jets in Turkey are helping them. American jets, NATO jets. So nothing has changed. The Americans and their regional allies are collaborating, are helping the Israeli regime. They're helping down Iranian missiles, or at least attempting to down Iranian missiles. The Jordanians have been trying to block Iranian missiles and drones for the Israeli regime. And as I said, the radar installations in Turkey are being used. So the Americans are using their assets across the region and their surface-to-air missile capabilities and their air force to assist Netanyahu. There's no doubt about that. So on the ground, nothing has really changed so far. And I don't think we should have any expectations for that in future. But things are changing. The fact that Netanyahu had to back off from attacking Beirut, I think that shows Iran's strength. That shows the strength of Hezbollah and the resistance. It shows the strength of the importance of Yemen and the potential that it has for causing major harm to Western economies because of their support for the genocide or the multiple genocides. And of course, the fact that Trump desperately wanted to prevent another war is an indication that Trump is in trouble and that he does not want this war. If he was, he could have just joined in and started attacking Iran, and he's brought in all those assets to the region. So he's brought in huge amounts of ammunition, jets, ground troops, that would be used to attack Iranian islands and Iranian mainland and carry out operations deep inside Iran. So he's brought in all those assets. But the fact that he was so keen on nothing happening, or the war from stopping or being or coming to an end, I think shows that all is not well in the United States.
I think what one of the main outcomes of this war was the new equation that everybody's talking about it in Israel. They say we don't accept this new equation that Iran is trying to force on us, which means that the acts of resistance would hit them anytime they attack. For example, Iran said Beirut or southern part of Dahieh, they're going to respond. And they're talking about right now the southern part of Lebanon. If they attack, the acts of resistance would respond. They don't want this because of what has happened look at the history, Professor Marandi, and what they did to Gaza, to the West Bank. Look at the West Bank today. There is no West Bank because these settlers captured all of the land in the West Bank. And they're talking about 70% of Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about 70% of Gaza. And I mean, many people in Israel want...
Despite the ceasefire. And this is like Trump's ceasefire.
Exactly. I think that's the...
And we don't see any of those countries that went to Egypt for the ceremony, any of them up in arms about this.
And here comes the difference, in my opinion. If the axis of resistance decides to respond to Israel, it doesn't matter. The United States cannot stay in the region forever, in my opinion, because they had the bases to be there. Their bases are not there anymore the way it was before this war started. And I don't know how capable is they now, or how willing is the United States to get back to those bases, because anything happening again between the two sides calling Iran and Israel, Iran is going to attack and destroy again and again these radars and everything they put in GCC countries. This is the new equation in the region. Then the United States has to stay, let's say, I don't know, Diego Garcia in Greece, in Jordan, in Israel. Oh, they're going to get hit by Iranian missiles again and again. So what is the assessment on the part of Iranians when it comes to Israel? Israel doesn't want this because they want to do the same as they did in the West Bank and in Gaza, in Lebanon right now, in Syria. And this is the moment that the acts of resistance says, no, you're not going to go that far. Everything has changed as an outcome of this war.
I think the Israeli regime definitely wants Americans to remain in the region. And it provides the Israeli regime a front line of defense. But what has happened is that the US bases alongside Iran are not sustainable anymore. And the Arab economies in the Persian Gulf, which invest their money in the West, they're consumer societies. The regimes are very corrupt. They purchase huge amounts of American weapons that they have no clue about how to use, as we saw in this war, and all their extra money, if it's not purchased on goods that come from the West and China and elsewhere, that money will go to U.S. stocks and U.S. bonds or investment in the West, which strengthens the United States. The petrodollar, of course, we all know about that. So the weakening of these regimes in the Persian Gulf, thanks to the Israeli-American war of aggression, or Israeli-American-led war of aggression on Iran, the weakening of these regimes are very harmful for the United States, and by extension, they're harmful to the Israeli regime. Because when the United States is weakened, the Israeli regime is weakened. Israel, contrary to what some people try to portray it as, is a very weak and vulnerable regime. It only survives because of massive, massive, massive Western support, both military support, but also financial support. And it's more than just direct support. It is the oligarchy that invests in Israel. So the oligarchy in the United States, they get special treatment and they invest in the Israeli regime. I mean, the money that the sheer amount of money that goes to the Israeli regime is enormous. Without that money, it would not be able to even sustain itself, let alone carry out all these wars. So the weaker the United States, the weaker the Europeans, the weaker the German regime, despite the fact that it's deeply unpopular and very violent against pro-Palestinians, as we see on the streets and in protests, the weaker these regimes become, the weaker the Israeli regime is. Israel is not a sovereign and powerful independent country like Iran. Iran is under sanctions. It has many, 3 wars have been waged against it. Terrorist attacks are carried out by Western intelligence agencies, and so on. Color revolutions have been attempted. All these things go on in Iran, but Iran perseveres. Iran remains strong because it is a sovereign and independent country. The Israeli regime is a colony. It's a, the prime minister's name his real name is not Netanyahu. He changed his name. He's Polish. The president, European. The government ministers, they're all from abroad. Almost no one at any level is from that part of the world, is from Palestine. They all came from Europe or Morocco or other Iraq or Kurdish areas in northern Iraq. They're not indigenous to the land. So this is a highly vulnerable regime. It's not powerful. It doesn't have a large population, but it is heavily, the West invests in it very heavily and supports it immensely. And the media, of course, does whatever it can to strengthen it. So based on that, we have to, everyone has to accept that if the United States retreats from the region, or if the United States is weakened, or U.S. proxies are weakened, and which weakens the United States and its Western allies or proxies, that weakens the Israeli regime. And the reason why the Israelis were forced to stop bombing Lebanon was because the situation in the region today is different from what it was 3 years ago. Now the axis of resistance is stronger. It has the upper hand. It has shown its strength. Yemen in the Red Sea, Iran, of course, on the battlefield, and in Iraq and in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which they were saying it's been defeated so many times, and we had conversations about this where I said that's nonsense. Hezbollah, though surrounded by Zionism and Wahhabism and Western proxies in Beirut and the community of its supporters in Lebanon, they're devastating the armed forces of the Israeli regime. And whenever they lose on the battlefield, the Israeli regime bombs their homes. And when Iran humiliates them by striking them to prevent the flattening of Beirut, in rage, they start slaughtering families again in Lebanon. But on the battlefield, Hezbollah has the upper hand, despite being surrounded, despite the animosity of the installed prime minister and president of Lebanon and so on. So the situation today is very different from before. The Israeli regime is far weaker than it was before. And of course, it is despised across the world.
It seems that the United States is getting back to the same policy they had before this war started, the second round of war started, meaning that, because yesterday, I don't know if you saw Fox News reporting that huge protests of students are breaking out in Iran, and they want to capture and showing the map of Iran, showing each and every city, each and every province in Iran, students are coming out. It's what do they want from this sort of propaganda machine that they're making? Are they seeking for some sort of unrest in Iran?
Oh, I'm sure they're. I mean, this is all nonsense. There's nothing going on in Iran. Iran is completely normal. The only protests that we see on the streets are the anti-Israeli and anti-Trump protests that we see every night, where people still go to the streets despite well over 3 months. They've been they've been on the streets for well over 3 months now, and according to polls, more than half of the Iranian people have participated in these demonstrations on the streets against the United States and the Israeli regime at least once during this period, which is a huge number. That means I don't know, more. I mean, this is a population of 90 some million. So I think that yes, that without a doubt, that they'll try everything. So they'll try to bring about unrest like they did in January. They have brought in lots of weapons into Iran. The Iranian intelligence has said that a lot of people have been arrested, but they've been bringing in lots of weapons. So they will definitely try to start up something at some point. Unrest because of the economic situation, the siege and the war. The economy, of course, is more difficult than before. So they'll probably try unrest if they could. Definitely they would. And then simultaneously, they will use their terrorists to carry out an armed uprising if they could. It will fail. I mean, that era is over. But they'll do anything that they can. But at the moment, no, there's no sign of any of this. And I was with the channel. There's a Channel 4 News of the UK crew in Tehran, and I think they leave today. But I was on their show briefly last night, and he was saying that in Tehran people are tired of the war, and I said, really? He said, yeah. I said people tell you that, and he said yes, and I said, really? I thought people were terrified, or the government is gunning them down, or so. Obviously, people in Iran can talk. I mean, there's this huge, in the West, they create this image of Iran, where people have no rights and people live in fear, and the regime, as they like to call it, guns them down, and tens of thousands of people were, killed, and all that nonsense. Yet the reporter walks around in Tehran on his own and speaks to people, and people speak of their frustrations. And so obviously the narrative is not all that, is not accurate at all. But the thing is that even when they see reality, the mentality doesn't change. When they go back, they'll still say it's a despotic regime. And in Saudi Arabia, you can't criticize the government. You can't do that in the Emirates. You can't do that in these Arab regimes that are all allied to the United States. And of course, in Germany and Europe, you can't support the Palestinians, as we've been seeing, or in the UK. You can go to jail for that. If old Holocaust survivors holding placards against genocide can go to jail in the UK. So the narrative won't change, and so it's easy for Fox News to have their viewers believe this nonsense. But and in future they may actually try to attempt to bring out to bring unrest through the sanctions and the siege, and their funded and the people who they fund and their terrorists. But it's not going to change anything. Nothing will change.
We know that Iran is hitting the targets in Iraqi Kurdistan. What is the fear in that part? Is the United States sending more weapons? Are they trying to do something on that border? That's why Iran is attacking and hitting over, and they're literally smashing everything in Iraqi Kurdistan. What is that?
Well, they're striking bases, and those bases are tolerated by the local Kurdish government in northern Iraq. The Kurdish government in northern Iraq is an ally of the Israeli regime and the United States. And the Israelis and, of course, the Americans have a huge presence in northern Iraq. So the Americans, the Israeli regime, British, the French, they're all working with these terrorist organizations against Iran. And so the Iranians are striking them because they know that Trump has mobilized them for a potential attack in Iran. And apparently there are 5,000 or so of these terrorists. And we see the same in Sistan and Baluchistan on the border with Pakistan. The United States, the Israelis, and their allies, they're funding the Takfiris. So the Takfiris and the separatists are all collaborating with the Zionists. And yeah, I think it was yesterday or the day before that there was a major operation in Sistan and Baluchistan. I think they killed 5 of these terrorists in 4 different cells and captured 19 others. They were about to carry out suicide attacks and other assassinations and so on. So they're working on the inside Pakistan with these terror groups. In northern Iraq, where the central government doesn't have much control. And of course, in Pakistan, the central government doesn't have all that much control in these areas either. And of course, that's how they bring in guns. That's how they bring in weapons. That's how in January, they killed hundreds of police officers. They sent in large numbers of weapons and they had their own people on the ground to stage that semi-coup. But it failed, and I have no doubt that it will fail again if they try something. But the Iranians are constantly striking at these groups to keep them off balance and to weaken them, so that if at some point there is another war, because what the plan is that when the Americans attack the Iranian islands and the mainland and carry out operations deep inside Iran, and they carry out airstrikes across the country, that these groups in northern Iraq and in Sistan and Baluchistan from the Pakistani government, from the Pakistani border, would all assault Iran at the same time. And then their collaborators inside Iran, who they find and fund and organize through social media and through Bitcoin and other means, that they would stage terror assassinations, terror attacks, and come to the streets and try to destabilize Iran from the inside. So that's the plan. That if there is an assault, all of these forces would simultaneously move forward against the country. The Takfiris, the separatists, the Kurdish separatists, the terrorists that they train and cultivate inside the country. That's basically the plan.
In both fronts, one of them in this Iraqi Kurdistan, the other one, as you mentioned, Baluchi, which is related to Pakistan. Is there any sort of cooperation between Iran and Pakistan, between Iran and Turkey, which we know that Turkey is concerned about these Iraqi Kurdistan and the Kurds, the movements? Is there, what do we know about the cooperation between Iran and these two governments who are against these sort of terrorist activities of these groups?
There is cooperation, but it's not as extensive as it should be, because Turkey is, of course, with NATO and it's an ally of Trump. So Erdogan is never going to stand up against Trump. And the same is true with the Pakistani government. So it's complicated. Iran is self-reliant. It's not as if that there's a huge amount of collaboration. Pakistan, of course, has limited control over its borders, the border area with Iran. Pakistan's, because of it has poor relations with the Taliban. It is has terrible relations with India. It's an impoverished country for the most part. So its a border infrastructure and its security infrastructure near Iran is lacking. And Turkey, being a part of NATO, after all, Turkey is also continues to transport oil to Netanyahu. So, oil from Baku to Netanyahu. So it's complicated, but there is cooperation. But there's always a limit. I mean, there's also cooperation with the Kurdish government in northern Iraq. But there's also cooperation between them and the Israelis.
Mm.
So, you know, it's
Yeah,
complicated.
it's too complicated. But when it comes to Lebanon, Professor, many people want to know if the acts of resistance is serious in the total withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah, that is going. If there's going to be a deal, that will definitely be a part of it. There's no way, not 1/100% chance that Iran will separate the Lebanese file or the Palestinian file, but in particular the Lebanese file, because as I said, in the Gaza file there is a ceasefire which was endorsed by Erdogan and Abdullah and Sisi and all these others. But anyway, that's a different tragic story. But there's not a chance in the world that the Iranians will sign a deal with the United States and allow the Israeli regime to strike Lebanon or to occupy Lebanon. They have to go back to where things were before this war.
Yeah, but because there are two sort of conditions related to each other. We know that Hezbollah has started attacking Israel because of Gaza, because of the attacks on Gaza. They started attacking the northern part of Israel. They said they have to evacuate their homes. Right now, during those days, we had some sort of occupation of the southern part of Lebanon for such a long, long time by Israelis. And is that going to be, as long as Israelis are in the southern part of Lebanon, they're not going to let anybody get back to.
No, they have to go. Hezbollah joined the fight by trying to draw off Israeli troops from Gaza, because we saw, the Western media was hiding it. They were busy lying about beheaded babies and the lies about raping women and all that, in order to give the Israeli regime the opportunity to carry out their genocide. They wanted to give them cover to wipe out the Palestinian people. And we saw the intention for genocide. We saw the statements that there are no innocents in Gaza. They were saying it from the beginning. It's all there. Anyone who wants to just read some of them, all they have to do is go to the South African complaint to the ICJ. It's online. That's full of quotes from these monsters who rule the regime, saying how they're going to wipe out the Palestinians. The genocidal intent was clearly there. So Hezbollah basically went in and drew away about, I don't know how much exactly, half of the 40%, half of the Israeli army from the south, from Gaza, in order to give the Palestinian people a chance. And they knew that ultimately they would be targeted and that the Israeli regime would bomb homes. The Israelis began to bomb civilian targets in Lebanon. Hezbollah did not target even civilian homes in northern occupied Palestine first. Only after the Israeli regime began bombing homes did they begin to retaliate in order to create deterrence. But they drew away those forces, and if it wasn't for Hezbollah, the Israeli regime would have overrun Gaza. They would have had much more resources to do so. So the heroic role of Hezbollah and its supporters, which include people from all communities in Lebanon, is something that will never be forgotten. And they're paying the price. And so it's Iran's responsibility to support them. And there will be no agreement with the Americans until the Israeli regime withdraws and ends the killing.
What's the status of the Strait of Hormuz as we talk today? During the war, the attacks that Israeli attack on Dahiya, Iranian response, then Iran said that the strait is closed. What is the situation right now?
I read that some ships are going through, but they're very small. They're very small. One thing I should point out here: sometimes you read in the Western media that ships are silently or quietly passing through the Strait of Hormuz with American assistance. That's all nonsense. No ships are going through without Iranian consent. And the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and others, they lie about this. But all they have to do is name those ships. If those ships were in the Persian Gulf, they're known entities. If they're no longer there, it's clear who they are. All they have to do is say this ship, this ship, this ship with these goods. They're now wherever. The only ships that get through are the ships that go through with Iranian coordination. And of course, they have to pay a fee. But those ships are not named by Iran, or because they don't want to get that, because of the Americans threaten them for sanctions, if they pay fees. So the Iranians don't say much about them, and they go, and but they pay a fee. The strait is controlled by Iran. They kept it shut for a number of days, but I think they let some ships through this morning or late yesterday evening. I'm not sure how many, but Iran controls the strait.
Netanyahu said we attacked Iran because they wanted to attack us with nuclear weapons. What is that? I was shocked when I heard this.
Why? Why be shocked? You should never be shocked with Netanyahu.
Because
anything
he
can say.
Someone is going to attack us with nuclear weapons. When you have that policy, when you have that sort of strategy in your arsenal, in your sort of strategy that you're going to attack other people with nuclear weapons. Nobody has ever threatened Israel to attack it by nuclear weapons.
But don't you remember just a few weeks ago, Trump, like there were these kids with Trump, and then he was saying that the Iranians were going to use nuclear weapons against us and all that, like, to these kids. I mean, we're dealing with people who have no sense of morality, no honesty. Western media has no morality, no sense of no honor. I mean, the Western media could have ridiculed him and attacked him. No, they don't do that. They don't even cover the genocide. When infants are killed in the West Bank, they don't cover them. When families are burned alive in Gaza, they don't say anything about them. When apartment blocks are flattened in Lebanon, if they do say anything about them, they'll say it's Hezbollah target. They'll flatten Beirut and they'll still say Hezbollah targets. This is the West. They don't have any expectations. They'll say the most outrageous lies, and still a segment of the Western population will accept it. But I think most people in the West have woken up. They've made a grave mistake through this genocide, because across the world, people have woken up, and in the West, despite the huge amount of propaganda, people are waking up. And each day of genocide and criminal behavior is only entrenching that hatred and waking up more people.
I think by now everybody knows how powerful and how serious Hezbollah is attacking or is defending Lebanon. But the problem, many people, the doubts are, is that going to continue because of what's going on with the Lebanese government? Are they going to start something against Hezbollah? Is there, or are we going to see some sort of civil war in Lebanon that would weaken Hezbollah under sort of a strategy against Israel? These are important questions, I think, which is related to what's going on in southern Lebanon, which is related to the total withdrawal of Israelis from Lebanon. And how do you see that happening? How do you see the situation in Lebanon internally within the Lebanese society?
Well, I think people in Lebanon are seeing the reality. I mean, there is that segment that is just bound to the West and bound to these regimes that promote Takfiri ideology, and nothing can be done with them. They'll just lie, and they'll produce fake narratives. They'll always do that. We see that everywhere. So these are a hopeless bunch. These people are hopeless, but most Lebanese see what's going on. They saw, for example, the Lebanese government negotiate with the United States, and then the Lebanese president insult Iran and the resistance, and it's clear that he hates the people of the South, and he hates the people of Dahia, and he would like to see them, humiliated and broken. That's why they block aid. That's why they don't let them move around in their own country and prevent them from going to different neighborhoods and different towns and villages and cities, and many died as a result because they would escape the south and there was nowhere to go, and so they had to go back to their villages, and their villages were bombed and their entire families were wiped out. So the prime minister and the president have helped kill lots of people. Western NGOs, Western embassies, these takfiri groups funded by Qatar and other Western affiliated regimes. But most Lebanese, they despise the regime, the Israeli regime. And people saw how the president of Lebanon, after making those statements and after the illegal negotiations, because the negotiations with Israel are illegal according to Lebanese law, after that, the Israelis went and bombed an army convoy, murdering a lieutenant general and his two companions, literally hours after the anti-Iranian, anti-resistance interview. And literally a day and a half or 2 days after the negotiations and the agreement between the Israeli regime and the government, the installed government in Beirut and the United States. So people see the reality. And people are waking up, just like during the war, even though these Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf were promoting and continue to promote anti-Iran propaganda, people across the Arab world were cheering for Iran because they know that these regimes are just US proxies and in the pockets, their wealth in the pockets of Trump and the likes of Trump. As Trump himself said, he milks them. And he said, the Saudi crown prince, has to kiss his backside and all that. So people see that these regimes are, they're not, they don't do anything for the benefit of the Arabs of the region or the people of the region. And they see that they are proxies, and they see that the president and prime minister of Lebanon, they too are proxies.
Yeah.
They too are agents.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a great pleasure.
दिला दे आ मेर मामी होई मज तू गया माही जान बड़ी टंगिए दुख बड़े बंधन वाला कोई भी न सकिए वो दुख बड़े बंधन वाला कोई भी न सकिए सारी सारी रात तेरी यादां विच लंघिए सारी सारी रात तेरी यादां विच लंघिए जीत जान में तेरे पीछे ठाड़ छोड़ी वे छेती कर आजा सोने माहिया मैं हाँ तेरी जुदाइया दी बारी वे छेती कर आजा सोने माहिया मुक गई मेरे बाला दी लाली वे छेती कर आजा सोने माहिया हो रात तेरे तक अखियां में थकियां रात तेरे तक अखियां में थकियां तेरी निशानियां में साम साम रखियां ओ तेरी निशानियां में साम साम रखियां ओ कसम खुदा दी बहुओं की पसियां कसम खुदा दी बहुओं की पसियां तेरी निशानियां में साम साम रखियां हमारे गए शबनम यो नमी डारी वे छेती कर आजा सोने माहिया मार गए शबनम यो नमी डारी वे छेती कर आजा सोने माहिया मैं हाँ तेरी जुदाइया दी मारी वे छेती कर आजा सोने माहिया मुक गई मेरे बाला दी लाली।
तो हेलो दोस्तों, गुड मॉर्निंग। कैसे हैं आप लोग? तो आशा आप लोग बहुत अच्छे होंगे और अच्छे रहिए। और देखिए सुबह आज की सुबह लोग नाश्ता कर रहे हैं सब लोग उठ के और सुबह सुबह सभी को गुड मॉर्निंग। अभी 9:50 और ब्लॉग शूट हो रहा है और भाभी अंडा मांग रहे हैं सुबह सुबह।
सालू जी अंडा के लिए बहुत झगड़ा कर रहे हैं।
बंद करा थोड़ी देर। तो अंडे के लिए हो रहा है सुबह सुबह झगड़ा
दोस्तों।
झगड़ा भाभी बोल रही है अंडा लाओ।
पहले सालू जी कुछ नहीं खाती थी, ना अंडा ना मछली ना मुर्गा ना कुछ बकरा ना कुछ नहीं। अब लेकिन
अचानक
अंडा
मन कर
खाने
दिया।
लगी हैं धीरे धीरे। कह रहे हैं लाला मुर्गा उर्गा खा कर बकरा छी बकरा ना खाई चाहिए।
तो अभी हमारी प्रिया दीदी यहाँ है, बैठी हैं बाबू को लेके। तभी रो रहा था तो इसको सुला के फिर दीदी को दिया। तो हम चाय पी रहे थे, फिर दीदी भी पी हैं। तो दीदी और कुछ कहा तुम? तो दोस्तों सुबह सुबह ठंडी लग रही थी, धूप में आके हम लोग बैठे हैं ताकि ठंडी बहुत ज्यादा पड़ रही है।
इधर चाय और घुघरी खा रहे हैं। बहुत लोग पता नहीं क्या कहते हैं, हम तो हमारी तरफ से घुघरी बोलते हैं।
घुघनी दोस्तों कहीं कहीं घुघनी कहते हैं, चना बहुत बहुत मटेरियल कहते हैं।
हाँ।
क्या कहेंगे आप लोग?
इसमें मालूम है सबको, जो हरी हरी मटर रहता है आलू बना के रहता है, बहुत अच्छा
उसी
लगता
का
है।
और चाय। तो अभी चलिए देखिए ऐसे ही बने रहे हमारे ब्लॉग में। फिर एक छोटा सा ब्लॉग और बनेगा तो फिर बन रही है ही ऐसे ही। तो अभी लेके आ गए हैं भाभी बना के ऑमलेट। तो अभी सब लोग भीड़ रहे हैं खाने के लिए, सबका हिस्सा लग रहा है। और ये रो रहा है। तो दोस्तों फिर वहाँ से अंडा खा के आए हैं। दीदी देखिए खाना बना रही हैं और बाबू को हिंग ले जा रहे हैं हम लोग पिलाने के लिए। तो ब्लॉग वहाँ पे हम पूरा नहीं कर पाए तो सोचे यहीं तक ब्लॉग एंड कर देते हैं। और यहाँ तक आप वीडियो देखे हैं आप लोग तो थैंक यू और ढेर सारा प्यार दीजिएगा। नए होंगे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कीजिएगा। और हमारी दीदी अकेले मिलके खाना बना रही हैं, अभी दाल फ्राई कर रही हैं। तो ठंडी लगा था दीदी? दोस्तों ठंडी तो बहुत ज़्यादा लग रही थी सुबह में। दीदी अकेले उठ के काम कर, मौसम बहुत ख़राब था इसीलिए। तो अभी बाबू को लिए हम लोग आनी पीस के लिए जा रहे हैं पिलाने के लिए क्योंकि भाभी बोली हैं। तो चलिए यहाँ तक आप वीडियो देखे हैं तो थैंक्स। और वीडियो को ढेर सारा प्यार दीजिएगा, लाइक शेयर जरूर कीजिएगा और नए होंगे चैनल सब्सक्राइब कीजिएगा। फिर मिलता है किसी नेक्स्ट वीडियो में, तब तक के लिए ब्लॉग को करते हैं बंद और बाय बाय।